Today is Monday, October 4th, 2021. It is 3:34 p.m. I am Lacey Brooks, representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. I am interviewing Reverend Billy Hester for the Savannah LGBTQ+ Oral History Project. We are conducting this interview via Zoom in Savannah, Georgia. And thank you for joining us today. So just to start real quick, if you would tell us your full name, and then if necessary, spell it, but if not, and then when and where you were born.
Okay, Billy Hester, Billyllyhester, born here in Savannah, Georgia, Telfair Hospital.
Right. And so that means you are a native of Savannah. Now, I do know you said you left Savannah at one time.
I did. Yeah, you may want to know, I was born in 1959, so I'm 62. So that may give you some bearings there. Anymore. I went to school, high school, elementary, up through high school here, went off to college and majored in theater at Valdosta State in Valdosta, Georgia. And after graduating from there, moved to New York City to pursue theater. And then ended up in the ministry, but that's another story. But
Okay. And so you returned to Savannah when? When did you return to Savannah?
Well, what happened is I was in theater in New York, ended up going to Princeton Theological Seminary, which is about an hour outside of Manhattan in Princeton, New Jersey. Was pastor, I graduated MDiv from Princeton in 1989, was in a church as a pastor for a couple of years in Manhattan. And so we moved, found my wife up there and had our first child in New York. And we moved back to Savannah. She's from Maryland. So I brought her down south in 1991. I was an associate minister at Wesley Monumental Methodist Church downtown for 2 years, my first 2 years back in Savannah, and then heard about a church that the Methodist denomination was about to close. So I asked if I could try it. They had kind of been giving up on it for, they had been trying, they knew in the late 60s that area was changing and it was in decline. They had tried a number of things and they had actually planned to close the church, but it was really strange. The church I was in New York, my secretary there, father became bishop of the South Georgia Conference right when I came down here. And so when I asked to try Asbury Memorial for them to give it one more shot, again, it was that connection from New York that helped me. Say, okay, Billy, give it a try. I was kind of at a prominent church. Well, it's about one of the oldest churches in the country in New York. Norman Vincent Peale was a famous pastor a long time ago, and that was his church at Marble Collegiate on 5th Avenue and 29th. And so I kind of came down with a little bit of a reputation of being at Marble Collegiate. So the Methodists in South Georgia allowed me to take this church they were about to close. It was Asbury Memorial on the corner of Henry and Waters. Now when I was growing up in Savannah, it was a very dynamic church. I remember attending it. I didn't go to that church, but I would attend it periodically. Our youth groups would meet together. Very dynamic, but it shrunk. And again, they were down to about 25, 30 people, their youngest member 66, and average age about 80. They couldn't afford a full-time minister. So I took another church that was about to close in Thunderbolt, Wesley Oak, right on Victory Drive and Mechanics. and did one service at 9:30 and then the other at 11:15, and did that for 8 years till both churches were able to support a full-time minister, and then just went over to Asbury full-time after that.
Wow. All right. So just to start with Savannah's LGBTQ history, can you describe your involvement with the LGBTQ community in Savannah?
Yeah. Let me kind of back up a little bit. I grew up on 65th Street and as a child, right on the corner of Abercorn and 65th Street. And kind of I'm straight. My first kind of remembrance of hearing about or gay people was that we had 2 men move onto our block on 65th Street, men from New York. And of course, so rumors were going around. I never met them. We saw them at a distance, and I was like probably around 11 or 12. And so, we kind of had our little gang, and we would make jokes about them and, call them the queers and things like that, growing up. I was in theater, and so in college then met a lot of gay people, and one became probably my closest friend, became a roommate, and started, seeing things a little differently. I'd been raised in the church and Christianity was a very big part of my life, and believed homosexuality was wrong. But meeting the people in my theater department that I really liked a lot kind of helped me struggle with that a little bit. And then when I moved to New York, this church, Marble Collegiate Church, had a lot of gay people there, and they were in leadership positions. And I had never seen anything like that before, and I go, wow, that can happen. So that was new to me. And then when I went to seminary and studied, theology and of scripture and all of that, I realized, wait a minute, I really think it's wrong that we're not the way LGBTQ people are being discriminated against. Back then, it would just be LG people back in those days. But a funny thing happened. I did a paper at Princeton on, I don't know, it's called The Bible and Homosexuality or something like that. But I read a lot about a guy named John McNeil. He was kind of the first person. He wrote a book called The Church and the Homosexual. He was the first to really be writing about it as from a biblical and church perspective. And he himself was gay. He was a priest and was thrown out of the Catholic Church. I used several of his books for the paper, and a funny thing happened. I was talking to one of the other associate ministers at my church in New York, and I said, I'm really enjoying learning a lot from John McNeil and his books. Have you heard of him? And he says, Billy, John McNeil just works upstairs. He's a therapist on the 4th floor. So the building I was in, my church building, John McNeil worked there. And sure enough, we had him actually come speak at one of our groups. So that was like crazy. So anyway, I moved back to Savannah with this whole concept of kind of what church should be like. And again, it was a Christian church, but in New York, but we even had Jewish people. Norman Vincent Peale was a dynamic speaker. So he had all kinds of people just coming there. And so black, white, economic classes. It was just what, I think the kingdom of God should look like. And so when I had Asbury as a church, back in those days, the corner of Henry and Waters Avenue was called Area C. That's what they actually designated it, this area of very much high crime, low income. And it was kind of a real put down, about the way they designated that area. And, it was like, how in the world am I going to get people to come to this part of town? Now that automatically one would think, well, just open it up to the neighborhood, which was majority African American, but they were already had their churches. They were going to their church. So it's trying to find people who didn't have a church. And right away, my wife and I knew that we could be a home for LGBT people, that this and would be different in Savannah, that there would be very few places like this, places of worship. And this could be our key to coming back. And what we did is, how do we even get people going there? We had a 4-person choir, 4 elderly women, 3 of whom were tone deaf. And so it was like painful. And I didn't even want visitors to come at first because, they'd try it, but that music was so bad, they wouldn't come back. So I had to get things upgraded. And what we did is, what my wife and our strengths was musical theater. So we opened up a theater as part of the church. We would have do 2 musicals a year. They were open auditions for the community. And my wife, who was an actress, she did Broadway and everything. And so she was already doing community theater in Savannah and was getting to know people in from cast. And so when we opened up this church and said it's for all people, she made sure to let the cast members of the shows she did know, and they started coming and they started singing in the choir. And it really helped our choir. And we would had tremendous shows. They would sell out. People would come to see these shows, and some of them would say, well, let's try the church on Sunday. So we were getting cast members coming to the church, and then some people who would try the shows. And again, all with knowing that this is a church open to all people, who are not just accepted or not just said they can come, and we won't criticize them, but that they are affirmed. And so that was very different, and that was kind of well known. And so we were able to build the church up gradually. A crazy thing happened about the first show we did the Pirates of Penzance, and I had this young kid build the set for me. We still have pieces of the set. This is in 1994 that he built it. And he got excited about, Nathan was his first name, about, he had never done much of that, but he got excited about it. And he moved from Savannah and went to New York and studied, and he's doing Broadway sets now. But I was in trouble because I could direct the shows, produce the shows, but I'm horrible with construction. I couldn't build sets and stuff. So one Sunday, this elderly gay man who had this real raspy voice like that came up to me after the service. He's very flamboyant. He said, my name is Dix Elliott, and I love this church. I felt my mother's presence here with me today, and I used to do set design in New York City. If I can ever help you, let me know. So I got Dix Elliott to help me. And he was incredible. He would, in Area C, we would have these incredibly painted sets that Dix did for us. Well, about a year later, he became a big member of the church, very active, and one of my closest friends. And he came to church. He came to the church before one of the shows and said, Billy, I'm here to see the show, of course, but my car broke down and I had somebody take me to the church. Can you take me home? I said, of course, Dix. So the show's over. I'm driving him home. I'm pulling out a parking lot. I said, Dix, I should know this, but where do you live? I'm sorry, I don't know where you said. Well, I live on 65th Street between Abercorn and Haversham. I go, really? That's funny. And I'm driving down Waters Avenue. I said, I used to live on 65th. I grew up on 65th when I was a kid. And as I'm getting closer to 65th Street, I'm realizing that the guy sitting next to me, who helped build this church for me, who became one of my closest friends, was one of the 2 guys I used to make fun of who had moved onto our block. And it's so funny. Dix was from Augusta, Georgia. He had thought about going into the ministry, but being gay, he knew he couldn't. So he moved to New York, met his partner there, John, who died. I never got to meet John. He had died before he went to Asbury. But it's funny. He had a younger brother, and his family owned Elliot's Funeral Home in Augusta, which is a well-known funeral home there. And his younger brother took it over. Well, Dix and his brother would talk sometimes, but his brother had problems with Dix being gay. And so there was some conflict and tension there. But when Dix died, we had the funeral at Asbury, and I decided I was going to share the story that I just shared with you, even though the brother may have a problem with me announcing Dix was gay. So after the service, we get in our cars because they had the cemetery and everything was in Augusta. So we drove on the highway to Augusta. We get there, and there's also since Dix's brother was prominent in Augusta, there was a good many people at the cemetery. And Dix's brother got up there and shared the story that I shared at church. And I had a relative, as I was pulling off out of Augusta, a relative came up to me and said, "Billy, you don't know what happened here today." They said it was incredible, But Dix Elliott. And what's interesting too, Dix had been at, oh my gosh, Stonewall. He had been at Stonewall the night of the invasion. He had lived in New York, and he had lived at Stonewall the night it was invaded by the police, and the gays fought back. And it's really funny, about 3 years ago, we had a couple from New Jersey, an elderly couple, gay couple, who moved to Savannah, came to church. And you may know about Bobby, because he was on they just celebrated the 50th year of that invasion. And Bobby Soletto was one of these, the couple that just came to Savannah several years ago, and they celebrated their 50th year together not too long ago. Bobby was a dancer at Stonewall, and he was in actually the birdcage. That was he said, it was my first night in the cage, and it was invaded. And he didn't like to talk about it that night, but because it was its 50th anniversary recently, a year or two ago, he did allow the media to interview him here. And there's a wonderful, I don't know if it's WTOC or what, but it's Bobby Soletto, and it's worth seeing his interview. And Bobby, unfortunately, died of COVID. We just lost him, maybe 7 months ago or so. But but he was a dancer the night of Stonewall. Yeah. So I don't know if you're interested. I guess I've gotten a little ways of the history though. But one of the major things we did as a church and as a community, when I started Wesley Monumental in 1991, and then I went to Asbury in 1993. AIDS, of course, had become a big thing in the 80s when I was in New York. And when I came here, it wasn't even talked about, and churches especially weren't talking about it. But I found a group of people who really who realized this was wrong and we needed to do something about it. So there were a handful of clergy and lay leaders of churches that got together, and we formed something called the AIDS Interfaith Network. And I'm trying to think if we formed it before I went to Asbury. I know we used Asbury some for our meetings, and I started there in 93. I just can't remember if we started it maybe around 92 in Savannah. We would go, I can give you the names of some of the people that were on there. Would that be helpful? Okay, yes. Jamie Morey, I don't know if you know Jamie. Jamie, I think, worked for the city, and then late in life, he went into the priesthood. Jamie Morey, Jamie-Maury. Bill Broker was a major player. Bill is part of Georgia Legal. I think he runs Georgia Legal here in Savannah, and he helped us become, what is that? 501c3, become a nonprofit. Bill Broker, a guy named Mike Freeman, who went to seminary and then worked for Union Mission. He worked for Union Mission, Mike Freeman. Diane Fuller. Diane was a big member at First Baptist Church downtown, and Diane's husband was Chris Fuller, whose father was Millard Fuller, who started Habitat for Humanity. So, but Diane, so Millard Fuller's daughter-in-law was Diane, and she was very social justice minded. Then one guy I was really impressed with being part of this is Reverend Gregory Eason. Greg is African American, and he was at St. Philip's AME Church. I'm pretty sure it was St. Philip's. But back in those days, it was hard to get participation from the African American community. Then what happened after a while, after several years of meeting and everything, we started getting more African members because it was moving into that population more. And but before that, it was a real, they didn't talk about that, it seemed like, in the African American community. So I was really proud of Greg Eason for being a leader in that. And Bill Willoughby is another person. He's still at the church over there on, I think it's Abercorn, the Episcopal Church. And I think that's where Jamie Morey went. It was one of the first churches I think we heard about in Savannah that would be, accepting of LGBT people too. I get all the St. Thomas, St. Lee's, all these things mixed up, but it's an Episcopal church on Abercorn. Those are all the people that I can remember that were kind of the nucleus of that. And we would have kind of like services of hope and healing, to say, this is for everybody, please come. And we're lifting up people with AIDS. We're lifting up people living with AIDS. We're lifting up caretakers. And we're saying this is not something that needs to be quiet or ashamed of. And we're here to pray and to help one another with it. And that these faith communities are here for you. So that was the AIDS Interfaith Network. One thing you may be interested in, when I started at Asbury and kind of had this emphasis of really being this welcoming church, we did get threatening letters. And since it was in the mail, the FBI got involved. It just went on for about maybe 5 months or so, and then they stopped, and I don't know if it was one person, two people. I mean, over the years, you get people criticizing you, say you're not doing the Christian thing or anything. These were different. These were actually violent threats, but fortunately, that didn't last long. We do have a security guard. We do hire a security guard at our church. It was mostly at first because we were in this area C where there was a lot of vandalism and looking at cars. But as you see all the hate crimes going on now, we say, don't stay in the parking lot. Help us, make sure we're all safe here at church, kind of thing. So yeah, we've seen that change, unfortunately. Another thing, and you may have heard about this from, I think it was Standout Youth who did this. It was in 2008. Standout Youth was the major sponsor, but we helped with it. And but there was a showing of a documentary called For the Bible Tells Me So. Are you familiar with that? Oh, it's a good thing to watch. It's a really good, you can get the DVD. It's called For the Bible Tells Me So. It's about 4 Christian families who have, one of their children is gay or lesbian, and their perspective. And what's really good about it, there is, some of the couple of the parents have totally changed and everything, but others are still struggling with it, but at least they're real honest about it. And one of the major parents in it is a woman named, and I wrote it down, I was trying to think of it, and I had to, she's something else. Her name's Mary Lou Walnert, Marylou Wallner. And what we did, they rented out the theater. Mary Lou's one of the parents, and she and the filmmaker came to Savannah when we showed it in Savannah. Ironically, I didn't know this till after the film was showed here, but the filmmaker told me the first time it was shown, it was shown at the Sundance Film Festival and won some awards, but the first time it was shown in public was at my former church in New York City, and I didn't even know that until after I met him down here. But Mary Lou's daughter came out to her when she was in college. I think it was college, wrote her a letter, or maybe right after college. Her mother had been very much, trying to do the Christian thing, and she was part of that. I'm trying to think of that guy's name who used to have that program, Focus on the Family. Very, very conservative. And she just was in shock when her daughter came out to her and, said to her that she would never accept that part of her, just would never accept. And the daughter ended up killing herself. So Mary Lou, however, instead of just keeping on, listening to the same ministers and stations and everything, decided to kind of do her own studies, and then became, grew and became totally supportive of LGBT rights, and it's always like on the front lines of marches and everything else. And that's why she came to Savannah when this was being shown here. But I just thought that was a really cool thing we had open to the community like this, because I may have not mentioned this. It was actually a public movie theater where we showed it. It was, it's closed down now, but it was a theater here for many, many years. It's the one off of Victory Drive and Skidaway, where the Target is over there, and there's I'm trying to think what's next to it, but over kind of closer to Skidaway. I guess I'm trying to think if it was even I think it was still a theater when you came. You came in 94, you said, 95?
96. I think today it's been refurbished to Frank's and might be closed again. But yes, it is Skidaway and Victory.
Yeah, that's it. Because what I said, that was 2008. So you would have been here. So it was still would have been a theater. Yeah.
Right.
But that was really cool. And I think it was Standout and you who, did all the legwork. I was just there as a panelist with some other people, but it was a really cool thing to do in the community that got a lot of publicity.
So I have a quick question about the AIDS Interfaith Network. That particular program, did you rotate from church to church to create an outreach to the LGBT community?
Yes, exactly. And we wanted to be sure it wasn't just singled in on one church. I wanted people to know that it's not just one church that believes this, that this is, other churches. We had one at Asbury, my church. We had one at the Episcopal Church on Abercorn Street. We had one at Gregory Eason's church, the African American church. It seems like there was at least one or two. Oh, we had one at Trinity, I think. downtown. Ralph Bailey did a lot of work too. He kind of went to Trinity Methodist Church right about when I went to Asbury, and Ralph had a gay son and had not talked about it much. And he was getting kind of in retirement years. It felt it was time for him to finally, talk about it more. And so he was a friend. I don't think he was real involved, but I think we said, Ralph, can we use Trinity? That kind of thing. So, but yeah, so you're right, it was rotated.
And do you feel like that particular outreach, that network helped the community find a place that was, and looking at for safe or affirming, those kind of a friendly environment?
Yeah, it helped. I know me in a lot of ways because, it's one thing, we let the gay community know, or gay people we knew in shows and everything, that Asbury was a safe place for them, which is great. That's good. But what kind of change are you making in the world and communities? So that's where the AIDS Interfaith Network said, yeah, we're really trying to make a difference. And we're glad we can do this at church, but justice ministries is very important and we need to change the world. And so that helped. And then doing things like, another thing I tried, I forgot about this. I can't remember. It was kind of in those years, but like on our sign, I'd had like a 3 or 4 night series of the Bible and homosexuality, and I talked about it and that kind of stuff. I can't remember if we showed videos or not, but it was a series again with the same concept, saying, yes, great that we're welcoming, but how can we be more active in the community and make a difference there?
So in kind of in that same idea, how do you describe Savannah's current relationship with the LGBTQ community? And do you feel that maybe some of this outreach maybe had that change that you'd hoped?
I would like to think so. We're certainly not where we should be, but in some ways we're farther along than we, acceptance of marriages came along a little faster than I thought it would happen. I don't know if you know our history a little bit with the Methodist Church. This was really interesting for me because, like, the Presbyterian denomination and Methodism and Lutherans, we would social justice issues. The Methodists used to always be first with them. But what happened is we're a global denomination. And so we have voting delegates in Africa, where our fastest growing churches are, and in Asia. And so and they're more conservative regarding LGBT issues. So when we go to what's called the General Conference to change our polity, in the United States, it might be 65% moderates and progressives. But when you add those conservatives with the Asians and not African Americans, the delegates from Africa, we never can get past it. And so we have people in the United States very frustrated about it. And we've been left behind a little bit from the other denominations who've taken it, the Episcopal, Presbyterians. I will have like somebody move from the north to Savannah who's Presbyterian, and they'll try to go to a Presbyterian church in Savannah and say, well, wait a minute, it's still, they're acting like they were before we changed it. So they'll come to Asbury, and here was the irony, our denomination hadn't changed, like their denomination had, but because they came to this region and was more conservative, they were coming to our local church. And the irony was that our denomination I was kind of a rebel for our denomination. And then we voted to not have any weddings at Asbury until everybody could be married there. So we voted as a church. Nobody could have a wedding. My daughter got married about 2 years ago and couldn't get married in the church she grew up in because we said no weddings. And she understood that and she believed it. Now, what's happened since is we voted. There was a big conference for the Methodists in 2019 that was going to, for once and for all, say, would the Methodists change or not? And about 20 of us, it was in St. Louis, about 20 of us from Asbury went to St. Louis with hoping it would change. It didn't. And so we voted to leave the denomination. So we're not technically a Methodist church anymore. And so now we can have same-sex weddings. And unfortunately, this has all happened during COVID, the pandemic. So we're not doing all we want to do yet right now. But yeah, so we're at a much better place with everything. Yeah.
How long did that moratorium last? How long did you not do weddings at the church because of that?
I think it was 5 years. I think it was 5 years, 5 or 6. Wow.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something else that I would.
I know I've thrown a lot at you.
No, it's been great too. So what do you see as the future for, Savannah's place or its relationship with the LGBT community? What do you think? Where are we headed after we move away from COVID? Let's hope that happens soon anyway.
Yeah, we're in an interesting place at Asbury, and also let me mention this. This has just also happened during COVID. So I had both of those churches for 8 years, that little tiny one in Thunderbolt, Wesley Oak, and a good friend of mine named Lynn Drake took over that church, and it's really struggled over the years, but it had the same theology since I had been there as Asbury. And so they just broke away from the denomination and have merged with us. So we kind of now have a campus, Asbury, and then the Wesley Oak and Thunderbolt. Now we can't really do much right now because of the pandemic, but we do hope that it's got great exposure being right there on Victory Drive, for promoting justice issues and things like that. Now this mostly comes from a lot of my gay members is they don't want to be known as a gay church. That this is a church for everyone. We're gay, straight and gay people come together. It doesn't, so they don't want to be singled out that way. And I understand that. And since we have put so much energy into this issue for so long, we're realizing too, we've got so much work to do with race issues and with poverty and homelessness and with the climate change and Wesley Oak's a great location for that because you're right on the bluff with the river and everything. So we don't want to lose this emphasis with the LGBT community, and we have to be careful we don't flip over too much and lose it, and I don't think we ever will. But part of our goal is also to look at some of these other issues too.
A quick idea that I did have, you said when you first went to Asbury that there were only how many members? 30?
25 to 30, somewhere in there.
How strong are you now? How many members do you have today?
Probably 550, 550, something like that. Yeah.
And how about Wesley Oaks there?
And only one of those, by the way, only one of those original members that hung in there, she's 97, is still there of that original 25. Wesley Oak is small. They've gone through rough times. I think there are only about 30 people there.
So they are small.
Yes, they are small. Yeah. I think we can help them out a lot. And I think, what's one thing we're excited about, for instance, we're kind of landlocked at Asbury with cement. And, it's hard for children to play at everything. Well, we can do some children activity. In fact, we've already had like an Easter egg hunt over at Wesley Oak, since we don't have that kind of land at Asbury. So it's going to happen. It's just going to take some time.
Right. One additional question I did have regarding the AIDS Interfaith Network. When you did move back to Savannah in the early 90s, what was Savannah's crisis like at that point with AIDS? Are you familiar with what was going on for the community in regards to AIDS?
Yeah, my memory's not great, but I just remember being frustrated that it wasn't talked about, that and I had come from a setting in New York City and a church where it was talked about, to this place where it was all covered up, and so much shame involved. And it's funny, Mike Freeman has become a very close friend of mine. He was a Baptist, he was Baptist and went to a Baptist seminary, I think it's in Kentucky, called Southern, that was, kind of broke all stereotypes. It was known for its social justice issues. And Michael Elliott, you might have heard Michael, who started Union Mission, he went there. And Chris Wilburn, who worked for the city of Savannah for a long time, he went there. It produced all, and then what happened is the conservatives took everything over and kicked all of the progressive professors out and everything out. But we got some of those people here in Savannah that have helped us a lot, and Mike Freeman was one of them. In fact, he left the Baptist church and became part of the Unitarian church, or I would have had him with me over at Asbury. But I called him today. He had suffered a stroke not too long ago and is recovering. But I was trying to see if he could help me remember some of the details, because he was a big leader at that time with it. And I was kind of new to, even though I'm a Savannian, I was kind of new to the scene here and was just kind of in shock of how it wasn't being talked about, and what can we do? Plus I had the motivation of, I'm getting gay members at my church, and I need to show them that we're trying to make a difference here, Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about the LGBTQ community and its history in Savannah? Any other ideas that you can remember?
Let's see here. I think I've done about everything I've written down here. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm sure there's stuff my little pea brain can't remember, but that gives you a little bit of a view of it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your history today. I really do appreciate it, and it has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Lacey. Good luck.
Thank
Blessings
you.
to you. Okay.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.